one thing I want to mention, if you are interested in seeing more presentations like this live and in person, we do have an upcoming live conference. This is a professional development conference. We also offer software training for our clients, but we do general breakout sessions from higher education professionals in the field. This year's event is going to be October 26th to 28th. Last year's was a lot of fun. I know a few people in here were at that event. We had some great breakout sessions. We had great keynotes from Michael Frizzell and Corey Hammond. This year's keynote is going to be Sandra McGuire. And we are going to have, in addition to those breakouts in that keynote, we are going to be also featuring a poster session. We're going to be hosting an excursion to Winter Park. And also, this is brand new, just confirmed, we are also going to be offering a tour of UCF SARC Center in partnership with the folks working at the SARC, the Student Academic Resource Center. That is a really, really robust center. They've been around for a long time. They've been around since 1988. That's a really great center to get to know and get to visit. So we're really excited that we're going to be helping to host a tour of that area. So we are offering some really great rates right now for registration if that's something you're interested in. Mark is going to paste, he's already pasted the link in the chat for you to access if you want to learn more. And we are still accepting proposals for breakout sessions as well and offering discounts for speakers if you want to get in on that. So I encourage you to take a look, see if that's something you're interested in. It's going to be a really, really great time. All right, so welcome to the latest webinar in our Engineerica Education Keynote series. We are so pleased to be bringing you this complimentary presentation today. And for those of you who are new to us, the sponsor of this series, Engineerica, we specialize in academic center management solutions and systems for higher education. You might be familiar with some of our products such as Academia and AcuCampus. And I do want to give a special welcome to any clients joining us today, but if you're not a client, welcome as well. And for those of you who are not yet clients, I do want to make sure that you know that we are offering complimentary trials of our most popular center management system, Academia. This gives you the opportunity to use it for an entire semester risk-free to see if that would be of use to you. So if that is something you're interested in, you can email me. My email is rachelc@engineerica.com, and I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more about Academia, the trial, and how the system operates. It's really user-friendly, cloud-based, easy to use, so that's my plug for that. So we started this keynote series for our clients and contacts who wanted to learn more about best practices and trends in higher education. Each month we feature a distinguished speaker to talk about trends in higher education and hot topics in the academic support field. We are still finalizing details for that next webinar, so just keep an eye out. We will make announcements via email and our socials and all that once we open up registration for that. And a quick introduction to myself, your MC for today. I'm Rachel. I'm Rachel Cook. I am a client success manager with Engineerica, moonlighting as the organizer and host of this series. I was previously a learning center manager for 6 years prior to coming to Engineerica, so I am as well very passionate about higher education student success. I also have with me Mark Kehoe. He is one of our technical support specialists. He is here as my backup and also to help with any technical issues that come up on our end, the speaker's end or your end. And now, finally, I want to introduce you to this month's speaker. Dr. Amanda Sharp serves as the director of the Academic Success Center at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Prior to joining the Academic Success Center team, Dr. Sharp worked at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County as the director of academic advocacy. She received her BA at Indiana University Southeast, her MED in education policy, organization and leadership at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and her EdD in education leadership at Frostburg State University. We are so pleased to be hosting you today, Dr. Sharp. I am going to go ahead and hand over control to you.
Thank you. While we get situated here, I just want to thank you all for coming today. I see a lot of names that I know and care about on this this group, and so thank you so much. A lot of people that I've been able to work with is with now colleagues across the country. So I want to thank you so much for being here, and not just really supporting me, but also really learning about a lot of the great work that we also did and we talked about throughout our time. So I wanted to start with just a little bit more about myself. And so as Rachel said, I currently work at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville as their director of the Academic Success Center. Just to situate myself within the conversation, I want to say that, our office we have 24 full-time staff members, a couple grads, and over 100 students that we employ. We have a robust academic coaching model. We have our tutoring support, our SI, we have review rallies, we hold appeals within our office, we hold academic and probation within our office. And so we have a lot of kind of different areas, and I know that every learning center is so different in so many ways. And I've worked in definitely different learning centers that look different than that. So like Rachel said, I previously worked as the Director of Academic Advocacy at UMBC. That is a mid-sized institution in Maryland, a lot of with retention and student success initiatives. I worked at a housing and a small private. I also worked at orientation at a very large institution. And so I have a little bit of the student affairs, academic affairs background, but really my work has always centered into retention. So if one of you work at a small private, retention is everyone's thought. Adding 2 new people to your numbers really changed the way that our numbers look, and finding people for them is really important. And then at big institutions, we really sit down and we say, how can we make these massive changes to really move the retention efforts, but then how do we actually care about students at the end of the day? So know that has always been my focus. Within this and scaling, in every single job, like many of you, I've really been on all of the sides of change, where either I'm moving the challenge forward, or maybe I've been on the side where the change impacts me, maybe for better, maybe not for better. But today I'll really be talking you through some shifting your mindset on a challenge. I'll talk there about why we scale, the landscape of our scaling. I'll also be talking you through a worksheet that you'll get a handout at the end. That can really help you think through your scaling efforts. And then throughout today, you're going to hear me talk about lots and lots of examples. So some are from my own experiences, some are from shared experiences from friends and colleagues across the country, and really across the world. And so again, as Rachel said, if you have a question about a specific example, or you have a question about how I scaled something or how someone else scaled something, if I can't answer it quickly, if it's a bigger answer, or if it's something that I need to meet with you outside of the webinar to chat more with, I'm very, very open to that. So as you're sitting there thinking and writing down questions, know that I'm very open to having more conversations outside of this webinar, and I'll give you my email and my LinkedIn at the end. Again, happy to chat with you as your brain is kind of running. So the first thing that I really want to talk through is this opportunity to really find the opportunities within the challenge. So when we're facing this increased demands with limited resources, our initial reaction is usually often this very stress and anxiety moment. And I've certainly felt that way, and I know you have too. So today I want to begin to talk about this transformational power of the way that we look at perspective within our obstacles. So the challenges that we face within all of our academic support centers can really be viewed through these 2 lenses. So one as a crisis that's threatening to overwhelm us, or as an opportunity that kind of invites this innovation. So some are meant to be both, but the difference isn't in the circumstance themselves. It's kind of built in the mindset and how we approach them. So the foundation of scaling successfully is cultivating this curiosity mindset. So this means approaching constraints with questions rather than assumptions. Instead of saying, why, well, we can't serve more students because we don't have enough space, it's really us asking ourselves, how might we reimagine our space to serve more students? Or instead of saying, why don't we have a budget for new staff? Like, we don't have the money. I've asked myself, well, what if we restructured our existing teams for the greater impact? So the shift from statements to questions really open possibilities that we might otherwise miss. So what if we, how might we, I wonder, moving that comfort zone to growth zone, that fixed to flexible, that reactive to proactive. And so before we transform our centers, I wanted to just take a second to say we really a lot of us, while we do this a lot in our day-to-day, when crises come up and when challenges come up from leadership or from our institutions, we need to remember that we have to transform our thinking. And I've learned this a lot through my own successes and failures, kind of on both ends. So when one of the universities I work for faced a lot of retention challenges, my first instinct, especially as a young professional, was to kind of protect what we had. And it felt very much like we were coming down with these unreasonable demands. And so that approach really led me to my own burnout, my own frustration. And the turning point really came when I embraced that reality of our constraint and got curious about what might be possible within those. So this mental shift was this catalyst that kind of followed everything that followed with me throughout my entire career and has really gotten me here today. So on the other hand, though, I've seen leaders' first instinct is to jump. So to do everything possible to help this university challenge or this thing that, you know, our VPs or our deans are coming down on us with. And at first, the jump seems really admirable, but then their team faced a lot of capacity challenges, which led to more problems, which led to long-term staffing issues. I've seen places where that jump kind of changes the reputation of the office, or the burnout of the staff who stays is insurmountable. So scaling isn't just about doing more with less, it's about seeing differently, thinking differently, and then really acting differently and finding the right solutions that positively impact the challenge, but also doesn't cause more challenges for your team and division or university as you move forward. So the journey from like stress to strength really follows a pattern I've observed both, again, professionally, personally, and within my teams. So we begin with resistance to change. We all see it. I see it a lot with team members who are new to the profession, who are new to the organization, new to our office. And so being able to really help understand that sometimes things need to change, and because we're clinging on some of those things where we're kind of not accepting the unknown. I've also seen staff members who have been there the longest really are clinging to what's known and what's comfortable and how we do that. So I wanted to share some questions that has helped my team and the teams I've led cultivate this kind of transformational mindset. So these technically aren't like rhetorical questions, are actually practical tools for you and your team to kind of shift that perspective. So when we're faced with a challenge, I often pause and ask myself and ask others, what assumptions am I making about the situation? So a good example of this is, well, our dean or our president wanted to do it this way. And my question is always like, but is that true? Is this exact thing, is this what they asked for? Or did they actually ask for this bare minimum thing and then we created all of these boundaries around it? And a lot of times people are scared to stop and just say, oh, no, we can't stop this program. We can't end this program. You know, recently we changed to a new CRM. And so a lot of our data was kind of not, a lot of the data and a lot of things we usually do, we couldn't do, or we couldn't do in a time effective way. And the answer was, well, let's just not do it this semester. And, you know, everyone was like, what do you mean not do it? And I'm like, we're like, yeah, like, let's just not do it this semester. Like, we'll have an asterisk in our books, like, it's okay. But why are we spending, you know, hours and hours and hours of work each week trying to get in data that is not going to be helpful for us if it's not going to be clean and it's not going to be useful and things like that? Like, let's start over. So another question is, what haven't we tried yet that might work? So I've been discussing more within at UT and in other places too. I've been discussing a lot with others, creating a more robust passive online tutoring service where students can look at videos and study material at any point, day and night. And as we're thinking through this problem to help serve students, one of our our tutors created in like 24 hours for fun a website that linked all of his videos. He gamified the learning, study materials, quizzes, all these things, and he showed it to us. And as soon as we saw it, we knew that we had something really special. And we actually hope to hire this student to help us create more web pages without having to then find someone that we have to do full time to kind of create this. So going back to assumptions, you may assume you don't have the resources, but in reality, you just don't have the right person, and you just have to find the right person, which leads to the next question, which is, who could help us think differently about this problem? So a good example of this is AI. So it's this type of technology that emerged really quickly, which caused so much excitement, but it also kind of felt impossible to kind of create. And some of that was the unknown, and some of that was time and money. But in this case, we kind of assume that we need this either formal consultant or external expert to solve this big problem. But if you're asking yourself, well, what haven't we tried? You might realize that you haven't asked your technology office or asked the right person in your technology office if and what they would design. And then you may find that there's someone in your office or even a graduate student who would love to help you build some sort of university AI for your program or your service within your office. So one of the most powerful questions we can ask when we're stuck is, who can help us think differently about this problem? So not necessarily who has a solution, but who might bring a fresh lens. Sometimes the person who helps us shift our thinking isn't in the room yet. So if you are joining me today and you're at a leadership level and you're talking about challenges with other leaders, maybe it's a coordinator who maybe doesn't know as much about the university, who's maybe a little new, but they are obsessed with something like AI. And they could be more excited and willing to do so much more with it than we would ever think of, but they're not in the room to be able to say, oh no, this is possible. So it may even be you have to look outside of your office. So maybe you're looking outside within the division, maybe you look outside of the division, looking for a faculty member who's maybe researching certain aspects of your challenge, or you're doing what you're doing right now and learning from me and learning from someone outside of your own known network. So these type of questions disrupt our patterns of thinking, and it opens up a lot of new avenues for innovation. So with time, we kind of move from that acceptance to our new reality, and this opens the door to the exploration. So trying these small experiments, learning as we go, and then finally we reach this point of innovation where we're not only adapt to changes, but we leverage them to create something even better than before. So throughout today's presentation, again, I'll share some practical strategies for scaling, but remember that all of these things began with this fundamental shift in a mindset from viewing constraints as obstacles to seeing them as invitations to innovate. So I want to explore next how this mind shift plays out in practice. So I do want to step back and kind of begin with understanding the landscape that really prompted this need to scale. So let's situate our conversation a little bit within the broader landscape of higher education today. The challenges we face in academic support aren't isolated. We know that they're connected to this fundamental shift in higher education ecosystem. So institutions across the country are experiencing enrollment fluctuations, increased expectations for our student outcomes, and then this ongoing resource constraint. And all at the same time, our student populations are diversifying in ways that require us to think how we deliver support. And then understanding that this landscape helps us move from reactive to strategic in our own scaling efforts. So some of the data points and once you get these slides, you can see, the citations and references at the end, but some of the things that, I've been reading up on, and I know you have too, is really telling this story about where we're going and where we're at. So as you know or may not know, it may be different across the nation for each one of you. Tuition prices are increasing more slowly than inflation in recent years, but a lot of our tuition discounts rates are reducing. And that reduces the revenue for many colleges. Our operating costs have risen very quickly since the pandemic, and it typically outpaces the gains in revenue. Our administrative overhead and demand for more student services also has increased costs. And then that all leads to this funding constraint. So budget cuts reduce public funding, making it all harder for universities to invest in research, hire top faculty, and then maintain that infrastructure. So this all leads to this growing competition for fewer students, which perhaps most significantly, these student demographics, which have shifted with increases in first-gen students, online learners, student balancing very significant work and family responsibilities. So we're seeing the number of high school graduates will increase in some states, and maybe you're in one of these states. I am. So like Florida can expect a 12% positive projection, North Carolina 14%, in Tennessee we're projecting a 15% increase. But for many, many, many more states, they're facing a lot of deep downturn in the college-going demographic. So around a 17% decline in Pennsylvania, 27% decline in New York. These aren't really numbers to us. This shapes the reality of our daily work and drives our need to scale effectively. So then what happens when these traditional tried and true models fail us? So I wanted to tell a story about how my own experiences that illustrate the scaling journey that many of us face. So a few years ago, we were a brand new service at our learning center that focused on retention and graduation rates through a coaching, advocacy, coordinated care model. It was working beautifully. Students with multiple risk factors for dropping out were meeting with these professionals one-on-one, and the feedback was incredible. And students repeatedly told us how meaningful it was to have someone genuinely in their corner, navigating the university with them. And in those early days, it was deeply fulfilling to see our work not only advance the university's retention goal, but also do it in such a holistic way that it brought joy to our staff and our students' lives. Then the pandemic hit, changing really everything and how we delivered our services. So we were able to quickly pivot to an online delivery, which was great. We were really determined to maintain that accessibility for students who needed us even more and more than ever. So we use a data system and a referral model to really proactively identify students who might need the support. We told faculty and staff over and over and over again across the university that we could help those students through those challenges, no matter what they were facing. And something expected happened. The more students who knew about us, the more students who came. And at first, this seemed like such a good problem to have. We were sitting there as a new office, and then we were able to say, like, we are doing it. We are getting the reputation we wanted, all of these things. And then the good problem started to get to a point where we started asking us questions. What's going on? Isn't this exactly what we wanted? More students, getting more support, all of those things were happening, but as the demand continued to climb, we started facing a different type of challenge, and that was one of scale. So that was really our pivot point. So when we tried to meet this growing demand, we bumped against the limitations of this traditional academic support model, which many of you see. We still do a lot of that within our centers, and that's not necessarily the problem unless there's a pivot point that really hits us where we have to change it. So these traditional models were designed in a different era, right? When student populations were more uniform, learning was primarily in person, resource allocations were much more predictable than they are today. So we're trying to deliver this new kind of service within this old framework. So we were still operating with this one-size-fits-all approach where every single student received the same high-touch professional support of these coaches. Our services were bound to the physical spaces in our center when we were there, when we got back from the pandemic. We maintained our standard like 9 to 5 hours, where many students really wanted the flexibility of some evening support, and then we relied exclusively on professional staffs for all of these interactions. So these traditional structures really just couldn't expand to meet the need of our new reality that we're facing, and that was trying to scale all of these students who felt like they needed our help and we wanted to help them. So, as many of you probably do, our first response to some of these challenges is simply work harder. And I know that sounds so simple, but when we sit down and think about it, it's like, oh yeah, in that case, we just try to work harder. So we extended our hours when possible. Staff took on additional responsibilities. We squeezed more appointments into a very already packed schedule. We answered lots of emails on the weekend, working on nights, working on weekends. And at the time, the approach seemed really logical, but it led to, again, a predictable result, which is staff burnout, declining in service quality, in a sense that we were constantly falling behind despite our absolute best efforts. And the breaking point came when the people like myself, who had always prided themselves on meaningful student interactions, felt like students were becoming numbers for the first time in their entire career. Staff who has always found joy in their work were now exhausted, and we just kept finding students who needed our help, but we didn't have enough people available to provide the dedicated support that they deserved. Administratively, I know I fell behind. I know I got somewhat of a reputation for my slow response time, and a lot of us did. And while the students still felt really supported because we poured into them, our work really plateaued. And so this moment made it clear that working harder within the same framework wasn't going to be sustainable, and we needed to fundamentally find a different approach. So that's when we stepped back and we asked ourselves some questions that would guide that transformation. And so we first asked, how could we serve more students without adding more professional staff? So this wasn't just about efficiency, it was about expanding our impact despite very, very real resource constraints. Second, how could we adapt to evolve in our student needs? So our students had very different expectations and schedules and learning preferences now after the pandemic, and the pandemic really only accelerated all of these changes. So these questions didn't have easy answers, but they gave us a framework for exploration. They shifted us from feeling overwhelmed to feeling focused, from reacting to creating. So once we sat back and reevaluate how to scale without adding professional staff lines, these new kind of possibilities emerged. We developed and implemented a peer model that helped first and second year students with those lower level challenges. This really preserved our professional staff time for the students with more complex needs. We re-examined our space limitations and found a lot of creative solutions. So we utilized gaps in between the tutoring sessions and their tutoring rooms for the peer coaching. And we maximize every square foot of our center by doing that. We introduced evening virtual hours to ensure the accessibility for students who couldn't come during traditional hours, and that really opened up our services to those who are working, maybe parenting, or just simply prefer the evening hours. And initially, we compensated those peer leaders with bookstore vouchers and with practicum credit. And so we found this creative way to build capacity with the resources that we have. And the results were transformative. We were able to connect students to the right resources, whether professional staff or peer coaches, at a much higher rate than what our 3, at that time, professional staff members could accomplish alone. Students with different needs received the appropriate match support. Our professional staff could focus more on complex cases, while peer coaches handled more straightforward situations. And then most importantly, students continue to receive that quality support, but just delivered through a more sustainable, scalable model. So this experience really taught us that scaling isn't about just doing more of the same. It's really about fundamentally reimagining how services can be delivered within your constraints. And I know the story isn't unique. Centers across the country are facing these similar challenges, increasing demands, the limiting resources, and changing student needs. So once we recognized that simply working harder wasn't sustainable, we needed that structured approach to understand our capacity. And the key to our transformation was really stepping back from that day-to-day pressure to take a systematic look at our resources and our constraints and our opportunities, and being able to really say, what can we do? So I want to address the question that I know would be on my mind right now if I was you, and that's great example, but what are some other kind of real world barriers that we face every single day? And then how do we take some time to explore those common challenges, and then scaling the academic support and coming up with some practical ways to address them so you can implement them the right way. So the first thing was budget constraints. And I want to start with budget limitations because they're often the first constraint we encounter when scaling resources, but are a reality for every single one of us. So when new money isn't coming, we have to think about things in a different way and think about resources differently. So one is conducting an asset inventory. Going beyond just your departmental budget. So what campus resources and kind of support or human resources might be available to you? So often we discover this untapped resource when we look more broadly at what we already have access to. And so be thinking about what are the things that are maybe outside of just budget, and that's resources that you could tap into. Student talent also represents a very incredible opportunity. It's usually one of my first thoughts in scaling. So for example, I know one of my colleagues' institutions, they partner with the computer science department to have their senior capstone develop their new scheduling system. So it created this win-win where students got this real world experience, and then the Learning Center got this custom solution that they would never be able to afford otherwise. I also think about something that we overlook a lot is microgrants. So many campuses, every campus I've probably been on, have very small, sometimes bigger, but small innovation grants or funds or professional development allocations that go unused each year. So a series of 500 to 2,000 grants can fund pilot programs and pilot projects that can potentially then demonstrate the value for the larger investment later. Another thing that I think learning centers don't think about a lot is donors. We're thinking about those in so many other ways, but being able to find a donor to help fund a project or even a one-time initiative could really be interesting within what that looks like for you. So tap into your alumni office. to help find the students that you supported or maybe tutors that you employed, and find the ways to create the events for them during homecoming, or a newsletter that keeps them informed about the big changes that are happening to campus and in your center. A lot of times bringing those students back will not just be tear-jerking for everyone, but will also be a way to tap into donor opportunities with the help of your advancement office. And then lastly, for this, external partnerships can also be extended for your reach. So local businesses sometimes are often really eager to have that university connection. So I know of a university that partnered with their local tech company that provided training for student workers in exchange for this year early recruitment access. So a valuable exchange that didn't require literally any budget dollars. The next thing we talk about a lot is space limitations. So physical space is very common in talking about scaling. Our buildings weren't designed with today's students in mind, and construction, while we see it a lot, is not always an option. So when we map usage patterns, we often discover really surprising pockets of availability. So at a college university, they found that their busiest space were only at 30% capacity before 10 a.m., which probably many of us see. So they started to create opportunities for this early bird programming, free coffees, things like that, for more people to come in the morning early in the semester. So then people started to get those scheduling opportunities throughout the rest of the semester. Thinking beyond the walls may also mean recognizing that student support doesn't always happen in your designated center. So libraries, residence halls, even outdoor spaces can actually become that service delivery point with minimal setup. So one institution I worked for actually created pop-up academic coaching stations in the residence hall lobbies during midterms, and they reached out to students who may have never visited the main center. You can also think about your college or your department spaces are also great to bring your services out of your office and embed those support within the colleges, while then garnering the support for that college. So thinking about how you can use faculty and faculty support and allies for that. Creating micro environments is about maximizing what you have, even though it's micro. So simple changes like mobile furniture, room dividers, or even plants can transform underutilized corners into functional spaces. So I know of a university who converted a very wide hallway into a pure coaching zone with just a few movable partitions and some comfortable seating. So remember also that virtual space isn't just a pandemic necessity, it's also a scaling opportunity. So digital environments can really complement physical ones in ways that extend beyond the reach of your walls. And so the key is really designing these spaces intentionally and them not just be afterthoughts. The next thing we talk a lot about when thinking about scaling opportunities is staffing challenges. And so finding and keeping talented staff, especially in today's job market, presents a significant barrier to scaling services. So recommending cross-training your team to create some flexibility in between maybe those peak demand periods where everyone knows the basics of multiple roles, so you can shift those resources when they're most needed. This approach can also create a lot of professional development opportunities that could improve retention of your staff. Also developing a tiered support model lets you match expertise level to student needs. So not every single student requires the interaction of your most experienced staff member. So creating a pathway where maybe peer educators are handling foundational support, new professionals are managing that moderate complexity of student support, and then maybe your seasoned staff is focused on the complex cases that maximize everyone's impact. The next is batching similar tasks to improve that efficiency. So there is an organization that I know of that restructured their appointment structure, so then staff members could focus on similar types of student challenges on specific days. That reduce the mental load of constantly switching up contexts, and improves both the quality and the quantity of that service. And then lastly for this one is hybrid roles. So offer another really creative solution. And so when departments share a position, you can often create a more attractive full-time opportunity while extending the support in multiple areas. So for example, there may not be enough money within your career service side to create a new full-time position, and then we may not have money to create a full-time position within the academic success center side, But if we partnered, we may be able to create a joint academic career coach position that served more students and provided that holistic support. And then resistance to change is also a big one. So perhaps also the most challenging barrier isn't physical or financial. Sometimes it's just getting buy-in for the new approaches that you're thinking of. So start with your allies, meaning identify the early adopters of your campus. So those faculty and staff members who you're already aligned with your vision, and then building successful partnerships within them to create that momentum and demonstrate cases that make expanding a little easier for you. Data storytelling also combines that emotional impact of student experiences with the credibility of hard numbers. So rather than just sharing statistics or anecdotes, make sure you're weaving them together. So a good example is like, among the X amount of first generation students who participated in our peer coaching pilot, Jasmine's experience was typical. She described feeling like she belonged at the university, and this translated to a 12% higher increase for our entire cohort. So thinking through how you can do those examples and weave those into the story really gets to someone understanding the impact of how they can actually impact a student and not just hearing the numbers. The numbers are important. Prototyping, also small things can reduce resistance by minimizing the risk. So a 6-week pilot with 30 students requires a lot less institutional commitment than a full program launch. But that could lead to a lot of evidence that creates the need for the expansion. So I found that starting with like a single course or a residence hall or something small can really create a powerful proof of concept. And then the last one for this is celebrating quick wins. And so, which really just means actively communicating early successes across campus channels. So when we launched our peer advocacy program, we immediately shared positive student feedback with key stakeholders, and then it created a lot of people across campus who really helped us garner that support and say, this is a great idea, which then helped us expand the model. And then the last two things is technology integration. So technology offers tremendous scaling potential, but tech adoption presents really just its own challenges. So focusing on purpose rather than the technology itself keeps solutions grounded in a real need. So what problems, or ask what problems you're trying to solve before selecting a platform. I've seen centers invest in very sophisticated systems that staff end up resisting because it actually didn't address the actual pain points that they were talking about. Next is leveraging your existing system. So that often yields better results than introducing new platforms. Most campuses dramatically underutilize their current technology. So before purchasing new software, explore what your existing tools can be. A colleague discovered that their learning management system had untapped features that actually eliminated them to have this separate scheduling platform. Something else that my colleague did, that one of my colleagues have done at their institution, is a student tech team to kind of transform their digital initiative. So digital natives can not just bring this technical skill, but also a fresh perspective on the user experience. So they created this student technology team that actually redesigned all of their online resources, and it resulted in the increase in utilization within them. And the last thing for this is progressive rollouts can reduce resistance by starting with your most tech comfortable staff member. So let the tech comfortable staff member, let them test, refine, and then become peer trainers for their colleagues. So this approach can help build some confidence and create that internal expert who speaks the language for your team and of your team. And then lastly is competing priorities. So as we all know in higher education, we rarely face a shortage of good ideas. Instead, we struggle with almost too many competing priorities and very much a limited bandwidth. So conducting a service inventory to identify what you could stop doing is often the most powerful first step in this. So what legacy services no longer align with your current needs? What activities consume resources disproportionately to their impact? One center I worked with, they just eliminated their newsletter. And that employee who worked on their newsletter was so happy to just have 5 hours of their life back a month. And they feel more free to be able to go and actually create something that's probably more than 5 hours, but their mind is freed up to be able to be more creative. Something else that I talk a lot about is aligning within your institutional strategic plan to create those national or natural partnerships and resource opportunities. So when we reframed our academic advocacy model when we framed it while we were building it to support the university's retention goal, we actually gained both attention and support from our senior leadership pretty quickly. And then measuring impact rather than activity shifts outcomes, your focus of outcomes that matter. So instead of just tracking how many workshops you offer, measure their effect on student success metrics. This approach often reveals that fewer, more targeted interventions may outperform a calendar full of underattended events. And then lastly, creating bandwidth for innovation really requires intentional time management. I'm gonna have to do this with myself a lot. So I know someone who implemented Innovation Fridays, where their staff dedicated 2 hours to just thinking and testing their approaches. Every single staff meeting with my leadership, have an opportunity to add something to a brainstorm, and we sit there and brainstorm things and talk it through together. This kind of protected time has led to some of my, at least, most successful scaling initiatives. In just those few hours really paid dividends far beyond the time that was invested in those hours. So remember that constraints aren't just challenges to overcome, they're design parameters that spark creativity. And so if you're sitting there and you're like, okay, like I'm hearing it, I'm feeling good about it, I don't know if we can do this or do that or do this, or I'm afraid we still don't have enough money, and those things are going through your brain, I do want to give you just a little bit of a motivation boost to just remember that some of the most innovative academic support models have emerged from institutions with literally the tightest constraints. So limited budgets have led to peer education programs that scale services but also improve outcomes. Space limitations have inspired mobile and virtual options that we've seen, especially during the pandemic, that reach students that we may have never connected with otherwise. So I really encourage you to look at your barriers that you're facing with this fresh set of eyes. So what is your biggest constraint? And is it actually your greatest opportunity for innovation? What if the parameters you're working with and you're working within are precisely what will lead to what your next breakthrough is? So as you leave this today in a little while and you go back to your day-to-day job, remember that the goal isn't to just like eliminate all constraints. It's really a work to creatively and to work with them creatively to create a sustainable, scalable support for ourselves and for our students. So I want to turn now to how you can think about your own scaling challenges. And again, you're going to get a handout. It's going to be available for you for a handout and something that you can also fill out. So the capacity audit tool is a way that I have structured the approach that can help assess where you are and then identify your best opportunities for scaling. The capacity audit it's a systematic way to evaluate your current resources, your utilization patterns, and the severity of what those things are across different areas of your center. So you'll again have access to these handouts. But be thinking about these and how this looks for you. So think of this as taking inventory of what you have before deciding what to change. So it's kind of like when you walk into your pantry before you go grocery shopping, you kind of need to know what you're working with before you go and make an effective plan. So this capacity audit can really examine any part of your operation. The handout does have an example for budget, technology, physical space, and staffing. But really any dimension you can use this for. You'll gather the data on the current capacity, look at peak utilization times, and then maybe look at those potential expansion opportunities. So the example you see in front of you right now is for staffing. So this is thinking through what type of staffing do you have? What is their level of capacity? Maybe it's worth taking note of in the semester is their level of capacity. So for example, obviously we see a lot of our tutors have some high times, midterms, and finals. A lot of our coaches kind of the same, but for example, I've seen coaching models where they're very heavy in the fall, not so heavy in the spring. So even thinking about different semesters and then different times within the semester. Next is that utilization rate. So this is where you can see on this example, the professional staff are at a 90% utilization rate, the tutors are at 75%. and then also their peak times. And then it moves to the severity of the challenge. So this could vary from university to really the challenge that you're existing. So in this example, the level was at a 5, but maybe it's because their division is asking you to have more night hours in your space. So then you're sitting there being like, oh, yep, this is severity is at 5 because now we're at this like 90% for staff. How are we going to get them at night? So that's what it feels like for severity. And then there's opportunity. And then I hope that's the part that you have the most fun with. And if starting this audit kind of feels hard, then just start with the data that you already have. So maybe it's appointment schedules, maybe it's space utilization logs, maybe it is time, staff time tracking, and then identify the gaps within your knowledge and then create a way to gather that information. So let's say, for example, you don't know how your space is utilized throughout the day. Maybe it doesn't have a full system and your CRM doesn't have that. A simple, going back to basic time sign-in sheet and a sign-in system or an hourly head count for just 2 weeks can kind of give you at least a valuable insight within a snapshot of what you're doing. And if you're unsure about how your staff time is allocated, maybe you're doing a tracking exercise for a period of time that can reveal some patterns to themselves and to you. So the key
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. I see a question here from someone saying that they're not seeing the example. Is that in the handouts that we're sending over?
Oh, I don't know why you can't see it, but yeah, it's in there.
Is it a different window than the one you're showing?
No, I can see it on my screen.
Okay, because we can see your screen. We can see the slide that says capacity audit tool.
Yeah, and then the staffing resource.
Oh,
graph.
okay. Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Can you see the chart?
Yeah, we can see the chart. Yeah. It ends at admin support. I don't know if it needs to.
Okay, I don't. No, I don't. I feel like that's okay. So there's different examples on the handout. This was just one example.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that. And so I think whenever we look at so maybe you're looking at your resources through a lens of capacity. So we're past like a staffing example and thinking of capacity. So instead of just thinking we only have 4 study rooms, maybe you're asking, well, how are our 4 study rooms currently being used? And so then what opportunities exist to really optimize them? So this is actually how we solved the physical constraint in the peer leader example I gave earlier. We found that our tutoring rooms were highly utilized in certain times. But when I looked at the schedule, we found that there was like blocks of just like a couple hours during the day that they weren't being used. And so we were able to then build this team of peer students. It started out as just 10, and then be able to just put them into those hours. And so then actually we ended up having 100% utilization in a lot of different areas because of how we scheduled. This design is to help guide you through this process step by step. It kind of helps you discover scaling opportunities that you might otherwise miss. And so really then the question becomes, well, what happens after you complete the audit? So hopefully you have a clear picture of where your capacity constraints really are, which actually might surprise you, and where your scaling opportunities exist. So for example, a center might assume that they need more staff when the audit might reveal that just redistributing existing staff schedules would actually better align with the peak demand times. Or maybe you're discovering that your computer lab is at a 40% capacity while your group study spaces are consistently overbooked. So you'll want to then identify that one key metric that you want to improve, perhaps the number of students that you're able to serve or the wait time for your appointments, and then map out how students currently find their way to your center, and then data that may help you be more proactive. So another good example just from myself is in our center right now, whenever I first started, I did an audit of staffing responsibilities. So we had a vacant senior associate director, we had an associate director, and then we had 3 assistant directors. And it was really revealed quickly as I kind of thought through, well, what does this look like? Who's over capacity? Who feels like they have some time? And then also, what do we need to move forward? I realized that we actually had enough staff leaders. We didn't need to add more, but the way that their responsibilities were allocated across the leadership was really unbalanced. So this led us to I changed 1 assistant director into an associate. And then within their job description, I added the work that she was doing with our new CRM. knowing that the utilization of that CRM and that system was going to be an extremely important piece as we move forward. And then I changed that senior associate director into an associate and moved some responsibility around to kind of balance that position and balance other positions. But I also added a responsibility to that position around data. So then we could have a better strategic goal when it comes to data, some analytics to really help us with our retention, graduation rates, and then services, thinking of the future of the Academic Success Center. But never once did I see this and say, how in the world are we going to do this? Or we're never going to be able to add these responsibilities without taking out others, or we're never going to be able to do this extra work with only 5 people. But we could make it work. We could move it around. We just had to figure out the right responsibilities for the right people. So this capacity audit can give you a little bit more of a permission to be strategic rather than reactive, focusing on your energy of change that will truly expand your impact. And then hopefully it creates an environment where your constraints aren't just challenges to overcome, but they're design parameters that actually spark your creativity. So again, while this tool can give you some structure in your search for scaling, one of the biggest questions that me, my colleagues, my team, and then people who, when we do scale something, they come and ask us and they say, what data should you actually collect? And how do you think through the data components of the scaling component? So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on data today, knowing that that's what really is running the show sometimes within having these conversations around how do we scale and then using that to our advantage. So here are some key categories that most centers should monitor. So utilization data. So when are students using your services? Which services are they using? Are there patterns by time of day, day of week, or time of the semester? The second thing is a student segmentation. So which student populations are you reaching? Which might you be missing? Think about this also with like classes. If you have a lot of students who go to your math tutor, but not enough for your chem classes, maybe there's an opportunity there. Number 3 is outcome data. So what happens after students engage with your services? So changes in grades, persistence, satisfaction, things like that. And then how are your physical space, time, and your technology being used within your resource utilization? So are you able to do not just resources when it comes to money, but also all of your time and your space? Is it being used in the best way possible? Are you not meeting those untapped potential? And you don't really need to get this like super sophisticated analytic like going and get it started. Really just begin with the data you already have access to, even if it's just an appointment schedule, sign-in sheets. Maybe you're just reaching out to your data office to get some retention and graduation numbers. And so I wanted to share just an example of how institutions have used their data to drive their scaling decisions in a way that directly impacted student metrics. So one institution analyzed their referral patterns. And they identified that the first-year students and transfer students were submitting self-referrals within their center services at a higher rate than any other population. So rather than just trying to expand a service across the board, they actually use this data to create a lot of buy-in for building that one-on-one support, specifically targeting the first-year students and transfer students. And this approach led to the improvement of the first-year and transfer retention rates at that institution. So in this case, the key wasn't just collecting the data, but using it to support a really targeted solution that addressed a very specific need. Another institution's strategic plan set forth a goal to increase graduation within 5 years. The learning, and I know many of you are in this situation right now. The Learning Center could have approached this in a lot of different ways, but they're looking deeper into the data, university data on graduation patterns, which great is because now it's a university strategic plan. A lot of their data offices are really building out some robust data within their graduation patterns. So while their Learning Center had been focused, like many of us, focused on those 100 and 200 level courses, and that's very traditional of what we do, they found that finding those high DFW rates in 300 and 400 level classes that were actually creating some graduation barriers for upperclassmen and pushing more time to them. So in the response to this, they expanded their virtual nighttime hours. They developed more passive online support resources specifically designed for these upper division courses. And they are very much expecting to help improve those graduation rates by addressing the need that really may have been overlooked by those are traditional assumptions. A good example for me is at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, the data revealed something that many of us, I think, miss within our centers, and that's where students physically are during different times of the day and how that varies by demographic. So university did analysis showing that male students, a population that I know we have some retention challenges with, that most institutions have some retention challenges, were heavily concentrated in the library during evening hours. So rather than kind of expecting a way to just continue to reach out to these students to try to get them in our hours between 9 and 5, the Division of Student Success created what we call Student Success Express, which operates from 5 to 7 nightly in the library during the week. And this program brings in professional academic coaches, financial aid counselors, and other support services directly to where students already were. And so they were able to get this very walk past it. We would give out food, all of these things to be able to say, like, come and really sit down and have a coaching appointment, whether academic or career coaching or things like that. So this demonstrates how physical location data, not just academic metrics that I think we all really hone in on within our data, can drive that effective scaling decision. So the key in this case is having the data to make informed decisions rather than assumptions. And then so we'll make sure when you're taking the inventory of your data that you already have access to, knowing that most centers are actually sitting on more valuable information that you don't actually know you're utilizing. And then remember, the goal isn't perfect data, it's just better decisions through strategic use of that information available to you. So just remember that data can really help us determine which students need what type of support. And so I want to shift to how sometimes being able to determine what type of support can also help us in scaling. So I use this, I've used this at my previous institution. I'm embedding it into University of Tennessee and the Academic Success Center as well, and within our division. But really the thought process is to think of your center like an emergency room. So you have a room full of people who need your help, and some have life-threatening injuries while others have mild illnesses. And it doesn't mean that not all of our students need our help, but being able to direct those with the mild illnesses, like a low test grade or something where they're just feeling a little bit not as confident because they got a C and they usually get A's, to those support services that are a peer coach or a tutor. And that looks very different from a student that we support who maybe has all F's or experienced a personal crisis, and getting those students to professional coaches and coordinating their care across campus. There's no single perfect way to identify students who need support, but I will say that effective centers use multiple data streams in this way. So some students that we find maybe through systematic data analysis, they may have these common risk factors or like failing grades or missing assignments, and then other maybe come through an academic alert system or a referral system. And then maybe they're also coming to you through, students are coming to you through behavioral care teams. Every once in a while, you know, our president or our VP sends a student our way. And then a lot of other students may self-identify whenever they need to reach out for help. So having a model for how you manage what students go to what resources can be extremely useful as a guiding force, especially when you're thinking about scaling. The EAB is a framework. They have a population health management model that can provide some structure that might, again, feel really overwhelming. It's something that being able to see it and then being able to show it and then being able to use it in a scaling way. And so you see the high need, you have a medium need and low need. And so being able to really create those buckets for your students, not saying that, you know, one group or the other doesn't need support, they all need a person, but can we create some systems in which the high need go to the professional staff, the middle or low need go to other certain aspects, We're creating in our Academic Success Center an academic intake coordinator position that's actually open right now. And it is somewhere where they can then kind of feel out where the student is and if they need to go to a professional coach, or is it just one class and one test and they're actually doing really well in every other aspect. Maybe they need to go to tutoring and a professional coach, things like that, that we're really looking through. So I want to also press pause for just a second and say that I don't want you to be afraid to adjust your data collection. And I don't want you to be afraid to adjust how you use your data. So I want you to think about it based on your capacity. So I've seen centers where very overly successful referral programs and academic alert programs actually push staff far beyond their capacity, leading to burnout. And I've also seen centers where service levels ebb and flow very dramatically instead of kind of that maintaining consistent utilization. So the goal is to use data strategically to stay at capacity and not over or under, but right where you can to provide the quality support in a sustainable way. So this may mean temporarily scaling back on the faculty referrals or campaigns or alerts, or tutoring requests during peak periods and kind of ramping up for peer support during finals, but find ways that strategically work for you. So as I wrap up today, I want to bring our focus back to kind of where we started, which is the power of perspective. So throughout today's presentation, I've talked and explored about how we shift our mindset, how we transform things, but I really want to bring it back to this idea that scaling isn't about just doing more with less. It's about seeing differently, thinking differently, acting differently, and finding solutions that positively impact the challenge without creating new problems for your team, your division, or institution. So some key takeaways that I hope you take away from this conversation is start with curiosity. So when faced with the increased demands of that limited resource, replace statements like we can't with questions like how might we. This shift is from fixed to flexible, kind of opens up the possibilities you might otherwise miss. Use data strategically. Your center already is collecting valuable information, so use it to understand your patterns and identify your needs. Match the right student or the right support to the right need. So not every student requires the same level of intervention. So creating a kind of a tiered support model like our peer coaching example kind of preserves professional staff time for complex cases. Meet students where they're at. Sometimes the most effective scaling strategy isn't about changing your services, but changing where you're putting them, how you deliver them, kind of like the Student Success Express example from 5 to 7 in the library. And last, start small and learn. You don't have to revolutionize everything at once. Begin with the capacity audit, identify one metric to improve, and build from there. And so as I wrap up, I just want to really encourage everyone to look at this capacity worksheet that we're going to provide at the end. Gather your team, pose the 3 questions that we discussed. So what assumptions are we missing? What haven't we tried? And who can help us think differently? And then identify one area that you want to experiment with a new approach and scaling, even if it's small. And just, I want you to remember that you're not alone in this journey. The challenges we face in academic support are shared across a lot of different institutions. So know that there's wisdom that we gain from addressing them. So I invite you to stay connected with me and others, share your experiences, continue the conversation. I will say that throughout my career, I've tried to approach challenges with a lot of curiosity and flexibility. So when facing constraints in my early leadership roles, I really discovered that viewing the limitations as a creative boundary actually sparked some of our most innovative solutions. So by asking what if, how might we do this, it actually guided my approach, and my team consistently found ways to reimagine the possibilities. So just know the most meaningful innovation often happens not despite limitations, but because of them. So the curiosity-driven mindset that kind of allows us to question assumptions and explore unconventional partnerships and ultimately create systems that are more sustainable and impactful than what we even started with. So this is my email, this is my LinkedIn. I absolutely meant it when I said I'm happy to continue the conversation beyond today. If you have questions about specific examples we discussed or want to talk through them in a more robust way, please reach out. I'm happy to meet with you again another time next week or something like that. But I also want to thank you for the time that you spent today. Your work is very important, and what you do in supporting students every day, and it's often and sometimes thankless, but I hope that you continue to find passion in your work, and today sparked even just a little bit of passion to get back into the madness of our ever changing, profession that we're in. So I'm going to hand it over to Rachel for questions if you have them.
All right. And I do want to point out, I know I mentioned academia at the beginning, but with the subject of data collection, that is one of the tools that can help you with that. And as a client manager, I'm very, very happy when I get to work with clients on ways to strategize data collection that help and don't make your life harder, because we know that that can be the case. So reach out to me if that's something you're interested in. But let's get to questions. So far we just have one, but please, anybody who has them, feel free to put those in the chat, or in the questions box. And the first question is, how do you resist the urge to take too much on and say yes to everything when you're trying to scale?
Whew. Do I say no? No, I do. That took a lot of practice, but I will say that for me, it's about every probably few months, I look at what's on my plate, and then I look at the rest of my team and say, is there something, I usually go and ask them, is there something on my plate that you would want to potentially take on? Even if it's in a small way, even if it's, the administrative or going to the certain meeting or this committee, if I feel like I've gotten a lot of the experience, and if I'm not necessarily needed in that space, but someone from the Academic Success Center should be in that space, sometimes I do that to then kind of, again, sometimes like it feels like it's only an hour or two that's off your plate, but whenever it's off your plate and off your mind, then you get to kind of dream bigger, and then you come up with more solutions. So a lot of times I delegate, but I always delegate in a way that makes sure it's being centered around not just kind of giving someone something that I don't want, but more around their own development within the staff. And even to the point where right now I'm reaching out to my old doctoral program to see if their students, the doc students, want to do a practicum within our office to create a program and some things within our office. It's going to be off my plate, hopefully, and into someone's plate that they actually really want to do it, and they're going to get all this development. It's going to be beautiful, and then I can go off and do something else and scale something else.
Awesome. I do want to briefly mention, we've had, I had somebody in the chat ask about the handouts. I have made those handouts available to download here. There should be a handout section, but if for some reason you're not seeing that, or if you're watching this as a recording later, we are going to make those downloadable through our website, and we will post the link in the email that we send out for everyone who registered, as well as on our YouTube, on the YouTube video description. All right, we do have another question. What do you believe needs to stay human in your student support model, even as you scale?
So for me, it is about finding in the right way to do it. And I talked about this a little bit, the referral or academic alert systems that you have. I wrote my whole dissertation on this, so I won't go on a tangent, but really around like data is so important to us, and the way that we use data, the way that we collect data. We are going to find students who need us through data. But there's always going to be that student who has a 4.0, never missed a class, getting A's on all their tests, and then their dad passes away. And then they're sitting there, lost. And if they don't get support now, talk about policy now, talk about withdrawals or not withdrawing, or the tutoring support, or taking a break, or whatever that looks like for them, mental health services, we could see then that they fail that semester. That actually happened to me. And so like I ended up almost failing out my sophomore year because both my grandparents died, and no one caught it until I got the low GPA. And so sometimes we have to be able to find ways, and referrals is a good way, or working with behavioral care team if you want to keep them low, to be like, hey, when you hear a student that's this, send them our way so we can really talk through the academic side of it and partner with them. That to me is the humanistic part of it that I always want to keep. And another thing is really just finding the moments where that one-on-one support makes sense. So whether it's an academic coaching model, a peer coaching model, the tutoring services that you have, and other kind of services that you're thinking of, how can you continue to make it a little bit more one-on-one in some cases, but maybe not all cases? Kind of like how SI is never going to be one-on-one, but tutoring may be.
All right, and I don't see any other questions coming in. Let's give it another minute just in case anybody has any. And while we're waiting, I just want to remind everybody that we are hosting a conference in October near our company headquarters in Orlando on the grounds of UCF. It's going to be a really great time, and for anybody who arrived after I made that announcement, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and paste that link in the chat if you're interested. We're still open to all that, to proposals and registration and all that. Here's a comment. I'm seeing some great compliments in here, but uh, here's a good comment slash question. We found utilizing student staff can be a roller coaster from semester to semester. We'll hire great staff, then after a year or so, they graduate. This was I remember a big problem working at a peer center at a community college. Though we hire and train new staff, the level of services isn't always impactful. How do you level your services to ensure they remain the same semester to semester?
Hmm. And this is going to be a very like niche thing that came to mind as you were asking this question is, so for example, right now at UT, we're trying to find more ways to support our 300 and 400 level classes. But we're also, while that kind of is happening, we're also really building out this like online support system that's a little bit more passive. And while we're thinking about this whole thing, we're thinking about scaling in, all these things are coming to us. We found that we do have a couple of our tutors who are leaving us, and they have been with us for like 3 years. And while this scaling model hasn't necessarily been like, I don't have the funding for it yet, maybe I will soon, we still have to do all these pieces, like, it's working through the system. I told my staff, like, please go ahead and let's start to at least get their knowledge down into like, what study sessions have they used, what are some studies set for these classes, the videos that maybe they've created, can they create more videos for us before they leave? And they are right now. And so in that way, we have these great people and these great minded students, and then you're right, they leave, and then it's like, okay, we have to find more people. But sometimes it is, can that moment last actually longer than when after they leave? And so we still have some of those things until they obviously have to be, recreated and redesigned and things like that later, but maybe we have it for another year or two. So that's one way. But another thought that is really around tapping into your faculty. We always are going to have those great faculty that is going to be like, I want this person to be a tutor, an SI leader. But being able to get in front of departments and really able to say, like, you can have a lot of input on who is teaching these students the supplemental instruction. And that's really been built into a lot of those 100 and 200 level courses within the faculty. And they're really, especially some of our high DFW rate classes, they're like, yes, I want these students. And every single year, then we get them because their mind is thinking about it. So think about that and how you can tap into your faculty, because they love to be able to push someone forward that they want to be a tutor or they want to be an SI leader.
Great. And while we wait to see if any further questions come in, I do want to also mention, because we had a question about whether or not we're going to provide the slides. So Dr. Sharp is going to be sending over those slides to us. She's already sent over the handouts, and we will include the slides. We'll include the slides with the recording as well and make that available on our website. And of course, if you do have any questions, you can forward those to myself or Dr. Sharp down the line as well. So I think it's looking like we are good on questions for now. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. But I really want to thank everybody for joining us today. This was another wonderful session. And again, when you're redirected to that survey, if you could take a couple minutes to fill that out, it really helps us out. And Dr. Sharp, of course, I want to thank you for the generosity of your time today. It was such a great presentation. I'm seeing a lot of compliments in the chat here. And everyone else, thank you for joining us. And I hope that you have a great rest of your week. Bye, everyone.